Welcome to AAC Building Blocks, setting the stage for your communication journey. The goal of this webinar is to get everybody familiar with AAC, understanding the different types of AAC, and why it's important. I'm Amanda Merlin. I'm a speech-language pathologist. I have 11 years of experience across a variety of settings. I'm an assistive technology professional, licensed through the Rehab Engineering and Assistive Technology Society of North America. I'm neurodivergent myself. I'm a former healthcare manager and have worked setting up both inpatient and outpatient therapy programs in hospitals and rehab settings. I'm a private practice owner, and I'm also an advocate. And my father was an AAC user. This is a profound quote, and it changed the way that I practiced as a speech-language pathologist. I was transitioning out of healthcare management and back into pediatrics in the school system, and I was put in charge of setting up programs in self-contained classrooms where kids hadn't had consistent therapists due to staffing shortages for a number of years. And I hadn't worked in the schools in a while, and I started reading research and getting involved, and I came across this quote. By 18 months, babies have heard 4,380 hours of spoken language, and we don't expect them to be fluent speakers yet. If AAC learners only see symbols modeled for communication twice weekly for 20 to 30 minutes, it will take 84 years for them to have the same exposure to aided language as an 18-month-old has to spoken language. This floored me and stopped me kind of where I stood, and I realized that I had to take a completely different approach when I went back into the schools. So what is AAC? AAC stands for Augmentative and Alternative Communication. Augmentative means we're supplementing our verbal speech. So when we're using gestures, when we're pointing, anytime we're smiling, facial expressions, intonations in our vocal patterns, when we point to things on a menu, using sign language at the same time that we're using a verbal phrase. Anytime we dance at the same time that we're talking. Anytime we're supplementing our speech with something else, we're augmenting our communication. Alternative means anything we're using in replacement of. So anytime you take and hit refuse or decline a phone call and you decide that you're going to send a text message or an email, you just used alternative communication. You decided you were too tired to talk and that you needed to use a different method of communicating. So in a sense, we're all AAC users. Alternative would be a communication board or a communication book, a speech generating device, a total communication system. But something, sign language, a total language that's used, with our fingers and hands. We all use AAC every single day. There isn't a person on the planet that doesn't use AAC because we all are multimodal communicators. We don't all just use verbal words to communicate. We all sometimes have trouble being understood, and we need a variety of ways to communicate the messages we're trying to say. There are three main types of AAC. No tech. So our gestures, facial expressions, pointing, sign language, anything that doesn't require any type of preparation. Light or low tech. So this type of AAC doesn't require any sort of battery or power source. So our picture symbols, a pod book, alphabet boards, paper and pencil. What else? They're very, typically we think of these as more cost-effective systems, but it can get expensive if you're, constantly adding to, a communication book, or, you're printing and laminating, and you're constantly having to grow vocabulary. And then our high-tech systems are the ones that you see, we have to get funding for. iPads with apps that are robust communication, with voice output, speech generating devices, from our bigger companies, single message switches, are three main types of AAC. So when we think about low tech, a lot of people tend to automatically default to PECs and PECs systems, which are great. When we think about setting up a communication system or giving a kiddo or a person access to AAC, we want to make sure that we're starting not just basic and where they're at now, but we want to make sure that it's a system that can grow with them. So we want to look at robust systems that meet and work for all communication functions. So we have some examples of low-tech options that people can start with, and they offer more than one shoot. I need a pause. Shoot. Low tech.
No problem.
I lost my train of thought.
What? If you want, do you want to start from the beginning of the slide?
Yeah.
Yeah. So whenever you're ready, take as much time as you need.
I can't read my notes. Okay. All right. From the top. All right. There's a lot of low-tech options that people tend to go for. PECs tends to be the most frequently used low-tech option. But there are a lot of other low-tech options that actually that are more robust and cover a lot more of the communication functions. When I talk about communication functions, and we look at PECs tends to just reinforce the function of requesting. When you look at typical language development in kids, and you think about some of the first words that a little one tends to say if they're a speaking child, you think of the little toddler and the terrible twos and no. That's not a request. That's a refusal. It's also the first step of negotiating. So we want to make sure that our kids that are non-speaking have access to all of the aspects of communication that we have. The ability to connect socially, the ability to share their opinion, the ability to request, the ability to refuse, the ability to negotiate, the ability to share their likes and their interests. So in doing that, we can support all of these functions with low-tech options. Not every kiddo is going to be successful with an iPad with a robust app. We can start with low-tech core vocabulary boards and start filling those in with fringe vocabulary. And these are some options that are free and readily available. The first one I'll direct you to is Project Core, which is a huge research site. And Project Core has a lot of free core vocabulary boards that you can download and print, laminate, and start using. They have them, small books, as well as large posters that you can print and put in your home with removable symbols. The major designers of apps have all made their core pages available to download and print for free. So Saltillo does the Touch Chat app, and they have these downloadable core pages available for us to download and make for free. My computer's running a little slow, but you can see here on the Saltillo website. Options. Another great option, the Snap Core Plus. And these come in a variety of sizes, and you can work through these. So all different sizes. And when I say grid sizes, we're looking at how many cells are on the page. Which when you have an AAC evaluation, we're looking at, how many vocabulary words, might be on your home page of your board. So these are on this side, all core vocabulary boards that you can go to for free and get. AAC Language Lab, right now, because of the COVID-19 virus, they have free subscriptions. This is a paid service, but they do have a lot of free options for families, for lessons and activities, but they do have free core vocabulary boards as well. And the other great low-tech option are pod books. So a pod is a great system because it offers, there's pod apps, there's apps for pod, and pod stands for Pragmatic Organization Dynamic Display. It's a robust communication system. Typically they're low-tech books. There are apps for pod as well. It's a linguistic system. You can use it through direct selection, through partner-assisted scanning. It can be modified for a lot of different uses. I'm looking for some good pictures. This is a great picture of a pod book. A lot of beginning and emergent communicators do well with pod. So if your speech language pathologist determines that this is a good linguistic system for your kiddo, then pod is a great way to go to support beginning communication. So pod is a great beginning or low-tech option. When we look at high-tech or what makes an AAC system robust, we want to make sure that any system we're offering has some of these options or the majority of these options. We want to make sure that it's meeting an individual's needs where they're at right now, and that it's going to grow with them and meet them, where they're going on their journey. The AAC journey, it's a journey. We're not going to hand you a device and you're going to be a competent communicator. It's learning a whole new language and a whole new linguistic system. It's working through motor planning. It's working through sensory issues. So it takes a really intense team approach, and it takes a lot of, not trial and error, but you're going to have moments where you're doing great, and then you're going to have times where you're kind of a little lazy. So it's peaks and valleys, and it's just a lot of give and take. But what we need in order to grow are some basic things. So we want to make sure that all of our systems have access to core words. And when we talk about core words, whoops, that's not what I wanted to do, are a small set of words that we use in all of our oral and written language. Research shows about 80% of the vocabulary we use. So words like it, go, stop, they're very effective words. They don't tend to have a lot of nouns in them. There's a significant amount of research behind core vocabulary, and it being very powerful. We want to make sure that not only do we have core words, because these core words can be used across a variety of situations, across a variety of environments. with a large amount of communication partners to say a lot of messages. But we also want to have access to fringe vocabulary. If we don't have the nouns to kind of pull the core together, then our kids sometimes aren't really engaged. We want to make sure that there's a good balance between core vocabulary and fringe vocabulary. And usually someplace in here, I have a page that's dedicated to what I call personal core. So, the most important people, the most important foods, the most important activities to that person, so that they're motivated to use their system. This is a personal journey, and if communication isn't quick and easy and effective, then if it's too much work, then we're not going to want to do it. So we want to have access to our fringe vocabulary. We want to have access to core words. We need to be able to personalize these systems. We all use communication, in different settings differently. We communicate differently with different people, and our communication systems that we're making for our emerging communicators, our symbolic communicators, should have the ability to be personalized to their personalities, to their interests, to the people they want to communicate with. If they're in fourth grade and they're little boys and they want to talk about, boogers and farts with their friends on the playground, then they should have that ability, because that's what little fourth grade boys do. So they need to have that ability. And we shouldn't be limiting them that. There should always be an alphabet. We should always be working on literacy alongside. And along with the alphabet, hopefully these systems will have some sort of grammatical markers or a way to show and teach grammar. Literacy should be developed at the, parallel track to developing language. It's not possible to have all the words that we need in these systems. But if we're working on literacy at the same time that we're working on language, then our kids can be typing or spelling and helping to find words that they need when they need them. And eventually a lot of our kids, the goal would be that, they're typing at, and using, text to speech and those types of things. We all use chunked language. Good morning, probably doesn't come out as good morning. It's one phrase in our minds. How are you? That's not, spontaneous, novel, utterance generation. That's one set thing in our minds. It's, a whole one unit of language. How are you? For our AAC users, they should have access to those units of language that we kind of have access to in our brains as units of language, those pre-scripted sentences and phrases, stories that we tell all the time. There should be something, stored for our AAC users so they have access to quick language as well. And again, these devices should give our users access to all communication functions. They should be able to argue. They should be able to share opinions. They should be able to tell jokes. They should be able to share their emotions and feelings and connect socially when we are teaching AAC and introducing AAC. And that leads us to a really big foundation, and that is we have to presume competence. Research shows that even mice perform better in their little mazes when they think that when people around them believe that they're going to perform better. So if we don't believe that our complex communicators, our multimodal communicators, if we don't have that belief that they are simply locked inside and they haven't had a chance to show us what they know, then I don't really know what we're doing. So students with complex needs, we can't measure their receptive language. We can't really measure their cognition because they don't have a way to show us what they know. We don't have a way to measure what they're understanding. So it's ethically responsible to presume competence. We have to assume that the kids and the people that we're working with are capable of thinking, learning, and growing, no matter what this looks like. We are respectful when we're working with them. We don't go hand over hand. We're always hand under hand. So if something is uncomfortable, they can pull away. We give them robust access to AAC. We don't say that they need to earn it. We give them all the words to start, and we don't say, oh, he only needs 2 words. We respond to what they say when they accidentally hit a button, just like we respond to a baby that's babbling. That's how they learn language. We don't constantly test. Show me. And we do this because if we continue to do this, then they start to grow and they start to learn and they start to show us all these things that we know they can do. So in order to take this journey, we have to start by presuming competence. So this is the Communication Bill of Rights. And this is a big advocacy piece. And this is how I get a lot of school people on board with me. I get a lot of devices to kids in the schools because of this. Right away, if you go through this, PECS doesn't cover, any or most of these. It doesn't check most of the boxes on the Communication Bill of Rights. PECS doesn't allow a kiddo to express their feelings. It doesn't allow them to say no. So we have to give communication systems that cover and are teaching all of these aspects of communication. And if we're not, then we're falling short, and we're not meeting our ethical obligation, and we're not helping these people, do the best that they can. So this is very important. So who can benefit from AAC? I think I already said this, but really everybody can. Anyone who cannot meet their daily needs with spoken language benefits from AAC. There is a lot of discussion in the autistic community on part-time AAC right now, that a majority of autistic adults anecdotally say that they use some form of AAC daily, weekly, monthly. I would say neurotypical adults are using AAC at some point during their day because of, workplace burnout, fatigue. I'm going to send an email instead of going to this meeting. I'm going to, ignore this phone call and send a text message. So we're all using some form of AAC at some point. So it makes sense to me if we're feeling that type of fatigue, that our kids that may be filtering out extrasensory noise or trying extra hard to regulate their emotions can benefit from AAC. So, there's a lot of research on individuals who learn to communicate using AAC, and it comes down and it seems like it's going to be this big overwhelming journey, but really it comes down to 4 best practices. And if you keep these 4 best practices in the forefront of your mind, then it becomes kind of simple, and anybody can do it. So we start with access. People learning a language need access to that language. So if we don't have our systems out and available, we can't use them. We can't see them. This is symbolic language. AAC is symbols. They need to see the language. They need to hear the language. They need to know it's an acceptable language to use. We model the language. So babies hear us talking for a year before we expect a first word. Our AAC users need to see us using their language. They need to see us using their devices, sometimes for months before we get them to even pay attention to the device. We call that aided language input or modeling. We need to make sure that there's a robust language system that includes core vocabulary. And we want to make sure that we are providing as many opportunities for communication and as much exposure to language throughout the day as possible. Most AAC users need 200 opportunities to use it every day in order to become fluent AAC users. So when we look at AAC intervention or this journey, we want to look at it through a language development lens. And this is one of the most famous handouts going around. It's one of the best side-by-sides. So if you look at this side-by-side, the typical language side and then the AAC language side, it's just a great side-by-side of how we develop an AAC symbolic language through that typical language development lens. And it shows how this really is developing a linguistic system for our AAC users. And it's more than just the expectation of if I give a verbal cue or a verbal stimulus, they're hitting a button in a response. That's cause and effect. We want communication and we want connection and we want engagement. And in order to do that, we have to teach a language and really do language immersion. So we speak verbally to their babies for a year. We use aided language simulation or modeling on the device. We use robust vocabulary when speaking to our babies. We're going to do that same thing with the AAC system. You know, when we're modeling language, we're going to model all of the things. We're going to model our feelings. We're going to model what we're doing. We're going to model where we're going. We're going to model any words we can think of that happen to be there. That's what we're modeling. We don't stop talking to our babies. We're not going to stop modeling language on AAC. We're constantly modeling. At some point, the kiddo's going to take over the device and they're going to have their system, but we're going to have a backup ready so we can still be modeling. So we can continue to grow their language, because once they're pushing one button, we want them combining two words. You know, once they're doing two words, we want those two words to be grammatically correct. You know, there's always room to grow. So this is just really, really great way to look at AAC intervention. There's still a lot of myths around AAC. So this is still one of the most pervasive ones. If my child starts using AAC, they're never going to talk. This continues to be, you know, disproven, and it's just not true. Time and time again, if I introduce AAC to kids, and I've introduced AAC as young as 1 at this point, it totally facilitates verbal speech. It provides a consistent model. It gives kids, you know, when they're regulated and they want to practice, they have the tool there to practice. It gives them confidence. It decreases their anxiety. By the time it helps them close that communication gap, that language delay. Instead of 2 words, they have this huge vocabulary and they're able to communicate, but we're still able to work on speech. But it's just a less frustrated kiddo because they're able to communicate. The new American Academy of Pediatrics guidelines does recommend the use of AAC to promote social interaction and also to help promote the understanding of communication. It does not delay the onset of speech. It actually does enhance emergence of spoken words. My child is too young, or they need to be so old. Again, we want these kids to be caught up and ready to engage in the curriculum at kindergarten. So we don't want them to wait until kindergarten to get an AAC assessment. We want them to get, as soon as there's a red flag, they should have AAC. This is something that I'm really passionate about. I feel like as soon as a kiddo, if we think that they should be an AAC candidate, we should have something going to support their language needs. I feel like every preschool classroom should have visual language supports, if they are, a developmental preschool, for all the kids, because it only shows increased vocabulary development, decreased behaviors, and if it leads to a kiddo needing a more robust system, then we're already laying the groundwork for that. There are no prerequisites for AAC. Nobody has to learn object correspondence. There's no cause and effect. I give kids robust AAC as young as 12 months old. I would do it younger if I could. If a person is breathing, they can have AAC. They don't have to be able to pick out a certain picture out of 3. This is gatekeeping communication. So if somebody's telling you that they have to check X, Y, and Z box before they're a candidate for AAC, then that's just not the truth. And again, this is the myth. There's no prerequisites for AAC. In fact, making things, we see these skills develop because we give AAC. So we see cognition improve, we see language improve, we see cause and effect improve when we implement AAC intervention, not because we withhold it. So keep in mind, the goal of AAC should be to say anything you want to say. It isn't about telling someone what you need or what you want. It's about becoming an effective communicator. It's about building relationships.